Today, we will receive reports from CCP Risk Subcommittee co-chairs Alicia Crichton, Global Co-Head of Futures and Head of OTC and Prime Clearing Businesses at Goldman Sachs, and also representing the Futures Industry Association, and Lee Betzel, Managing Director and Chief Risk Officer of the CME Group.
Well, hello there, my friends. Chris Mark is here with you for Arcadia Economics, and a quick update on the curious case of acting CFTC Commissioner Rostin Benham. You may have heard some of his comments in a recent appearance, but let's play them again, because despite not even able getting the agency to confirm if they looked at the 2 rounds of evidence I sent that actually explain how the price of silver fell 10% on possibly the greatest single day of silver demand in history, perhaps this will explain a little bit more about what's actually been going on.
The CFTC put out a public statement around the silver markets, and you're keeping a close eye on that. Can you follow up on what the CFTC may be doing in regards to this rise of retail participation, making sure that these important vehicles that we talk about, futures and options, are accessible to the retail participants, but also with the proper risk disclosures and the proper oversight of those products? So give us some thoughts on how this phenomena is impacting the CFTC.
Yeah, thanks, Walt. It's a great question. It's something that I've been thinking about, and the events around the silver markets happened shortly after I took over. I think in late January, and I think it's important to distinguish what an equity space with what happened in our markets, in the future space specifically, with the silver contract. And in many respects, the resiliency and the market structure of the futures market really were able to tamp down what could have been a much worse situation in the silver.
Now, fortunately, I think I understand what he was talking about there. The much worse situation. The LBMA confirmed they were scared because they were close to running out of metal, although Jeff Curry of Goldman Sachs, who is a member firm of the LBMA, said the opposite on February 2nd and 4th, while his funds that he's an authorized participant for changed the legal language because they were deathly afraid of a short squeeze. But also, even aside from that, turns out in terms of this market structure, I didn't understand what he meant. Let me play that again, because he's saying market structure. He didn't say the CFTC tamped it down. He said the market structure. So let's take that one more time.
The silver contract. And in many respects, the resiliency and the market structure of the futures market really were able to tamp down what could have been a much worse situation in the silver market.
Much worse. Clearly, we know who was getting clobbered was the shorts. The LBMA report also talked about how their risk managers actually told them to stop writing so much short paper for a while. The price went up, and then when they resumed, the price went down. But I have a little clarity on the market structure he's talking about, because amazingly enough, there is 5 hours of testimony from this very agency. I've only made it through 15 minutes myself, but I did get one of the questions answered, which fortunately Ross from the same location reveals, amongst other things, here.
Today, we will receive reports from CCP Risk Subcommittee co-chairs Alicia Crichton, Global Co-Head of Futures and Head of OTC and Prime Clearing Businesses at Goldman Sachs, and also representing the Futures Industry Association, and Lee Betzel, Managing Director and Chief Risk Officer of the CME Group.
Surely we must have misheard that. He didn't just say that the committee. There were some interesting titles. I must have misheard that out of my flying saucer. Let's hear it again.
Today, we will receive reports from CCP Risk Subcommittee co-chairs.
CCP, well, there's a inspiring acronym.
Alicia Crichton, Global Co-Head of Futures and Head of...
Global Co-Head of Futures. Global Co-Head of Futures. Wow, I wonder if at Goldman, I wonder if she knows Jeff.
OTC and Prime Clearing Businesses at Goldman Sachs.
Prime Clearing Businesses at Goldman Sachs. And wait a second, well, what? I'm sure, why would... You wouldn't have one of these banks that, like Goldman Sachs, because that would be weird if Goldman Sachs was somehow involved with the regulators that are supposed to, that would seemingly be a conflict of interest. because then it would give credence to any of the people who said that the regulators were in the bank's hip pocket, kind of give credence to that. So let me make sure I heard this correctly.
Today, we will receive reports from CCP Risk Subcommittee co-chairs.
Subcommittee co-chair, they received a report.
Alicia Crichton, Global Co-Head of Futures and Head of OTC and Prime Clearing Businesses at Goldman Sachs.
That is quite a resume. Does she communicate with Jeff? This woman, Alicia Crichton, did she sign off on those prospectus changes? That here's the interesting thing. When I called iShares on February 5th, spent 40 minutes trying to get an audit. All they could give me was an inspection report. Shows no one's looked at the metal since JP Morgan, since they paid the $920 million fine. I don't even know if they paid it. They didn't mention prospectus changes. In fact, if you call there now and ask them what they did to notify their customers, I was told that, well, if you click on the thing, you can see the dates changed. So means, I guess, none of the people who bought the 120 million shares that weekend asked, unless you're clicking every day.
Alicia Crichton, Global Co-Head of Futures and Head of OTC and Prime Clearing Businesses at Goldman Sachs.
Doesn't tell you that.
And also representing the Futures Industry Association. And Lee Betzel, Managing Director and Chief Risk Officer of the CME Group.
Oh. Futures Association, CME Group. When I called the CME Group after I saw the last gold delivery period, Goldman was over the limits again. Called CME and said, Jeff Curry said you can't have a short squeeze. Jeff Curry of Goldman Sachs said you can't have a short squeeze because of position limits. Goldman Sachs routinely violates the position limits. What up with that? He says, well, they could have a hedge exemption or they could be in violation. This was the representative of the CME. Well, I say, well, which is it? He says that's not public. But when I asked the CME, can you even confirm if someone has looked at the report and has checked whether they're in violation or if there's a hedge limit? Can you at least confirm that there's someone in somewhere that saw that the number is over the limit? Because I called and said, am I looking at the right limits? I see 6,000 in gold and there's 8,900. Am I looking at the right limit? Yes, they're either in violation or they have a hedge exemption. Which is it? That's not public. I said, can you confirm that someone has looked at it? He was not able to do that. He said the CFTC monitors it. And who is the CFTC getting their research from? Goldman Sachs. When I ask, have you guys even looked at the evidence I've sent? All they can tell me is open investigation. They can't talk. And then here's what they say.
Transparency, resiliency, credibility that make our markets very, very resilient and strong. Those are the types of things that I'm thinking about.
So I'm glad I found this clip. I can't wait to watch the rest. And by the way, if you'd like some answers, go to the CFTC's contact page. I encourage you to call them. Call these numbers. Actually, Rostin Benham, there's his phone number, 202-418-5575. Ask questions about this. Download the report of the letter that I wrote asking a whole host of other questions. If you prefer not to make calls or get involved that way, but you'd like to support legal action, wow, I'm quite honored. Look, over $26,000 has been donated. Thank you to everyone who supported that in the effort to bring integrity back to our markets. And lastly, if you want to ask any of these questions to iShares, call 1-800-iShares. That's easy enough to remember, or 1-800-474-2737. Other ways to reach out, you can send them a message. Ask them how silver fell 10% while their own trust set a historical record. Hey, Jeff Curry of Goldman Sachs says it wasn't that big. Trust that shows a historical record. Maybe their board of directors is concerned about the legal risk that some of their authorized participants have exposed them to. But anyway, you can call iShares at 1-800-iShares or contact Transparent Ross Benham at 202-418-5575. And with that said, hit the subscription button and the notification bell, because as I go through more of this fascinating testimony, I can't even imagine what else is on there. So thank you as always for being here, and I will see you again soon.
The resiliency and the market structure of the futures market really were able to tamp down what could have been a much worse situation in the silver markets. very strong initial margin, daily mark to market, position limits. All of these things together, I think, really were very effective in managing what was at some point in those few days in late January potentially a challenging situation. And give credit to the exchange for utilizing its authority and some of the tools it has within the margin space to control the sort of the price and the volatility of the silver contracts. I want to be open and fair and transparent. I also want the disclosures and the guardrails to be there that are strong, are very clear, so that investors know what they're getting involved in.
Turning back to our agenda, the Market Structure Subcommittee, led by Lisa Shemy, Associate General Counsel and Chief Legal Officer for CBOE FX Markets and CBOE SEF, and Stephen Berger, Managing Director and Global Head of Government and Regulatory Policy at Citadel.
And I shared with my colleagues within the U.S. government quite frankly, that there are going to be certain individuals who shouldn't be trading in our market yet.